The sun-baked dust of Rattlesnake Gulch whispered grim tales. They said Alara Vance's face was a blight, a visage that could curdle milk and stop a man's heart dead in his chest. For 3 years, the townsfolk had proven their belief with scorn, with stones, and with spittle in the dirt beside her shrinking shadow. Every day, Alara, barely 22 years old, wore a coarse canvas hood over her head, a self-imposed prison to shield the world from the monster they insisted lived beneath. On October 12, 1888, the Arizona sun beat down like a vengeful hammer. Rattlesnake Gulch looked much like any other frontier outpost. Weathered wooden boardwalks, the listing frame of the Howlin' Coyote Saloon, the stout Rattlesnake Gulch mercantile and bank standing proud, and a small church tilting gently from years of wind. Yet, a deeper rot festered in that town, a cruel spectacle that played out every afternoon for sport. Before the Howlin' Coyote, Alara knelt on raw hands and knees, scrubbing the grimy planks with gray soap water. Her cotton dress, rough and faded, bore the permanent stains of endless labor. Her hands were a map of cracks and angry red, but no one saw her hands. No one saw her dress. Every eye was riveted on the canvas hood tied tight around her head. The cloth was old, dirty. 2 rough holes, cut for eyes, offered a narrow view, and a small slit allowed her to breathe, though the twine around her neck chafed her skin raw. "Move faster, Sackface!" Jedediah Jed Kincaid, the timber camp foreman, bellowed from the saloon porch. He was a barrel-chested man, unwashed and smelling worse than his own mules. He kicked over her bucket, sending filthy water sluicing across the boards she'd just cleaned. The men around him roared with laughter. Alara Vance did not cry. She did not speak. She simply picked up the bucket, refilled it, and began again. Inside the hood, her breath came heavy and hot, the air stale with old cloth and fear. The years of grief had aged her far beyond her 22 summers. She'd worn the canvas for 3 years, ever since the fire. 3 years earlier, St. Jude's Home for Children, on the edge of town, had burned in the dead of night. Flames had devoured the wooden building while the screams of children echoed in the darkness. The town had needed someone to blame. Sterling Thorne, the wealthiest man in Rattlesnake Gulch and owner of the mercantile and bank, had claimed he saw Alara near the building with a lantern. He'd said her face was so terribly burned it would frighten children for life, then declared he was showing her mercy by allowing her to work off the damages, so long as she kept her face covered. The town had believed him. It was easier that way, which Tobias muttered as he stepped down from the porch. Jedediah muttered, pressing his spur into the back of Alara's calf. She gasped, curling inward to protect herself. The laughter swelled, then abruptly died. A silence, cold as a canyon wind, swept down the street. A horse approached from the far end of town. It was Goliath, a massive stallion, taller than any in Rattlesnake Gulch, his coat dark and gleaming. The rider sat high in the saddle, broad-shouldered and utterly still. Ronan Blackwood had descended from the Mogollon Rim. People in Rattlesnake Gulch knew the name. They spoke it in hushed tones. He lived alone in a cabin high in the peaks, trading furs twice a year. Some said he'd tracked a crippled cougar for a week. Others claimed he'd fought off a grizzly with nothing but a Bowie knife. He was not a man who feared much. He pulled Goliath to a stop in front of the saloon. The animal stamped once, hard enough to rattle the boardwalk. Ronan did not look at Jedediah. He did not look at the laughing men. His eyes rested on the young woman kneeling in the dirt, a canvas hood on her head. "Get up," he said. His voice was deep and steady, not loud, but it carried. Jedediah stepped forward. "She's working, mountain man. That's the town freak." Ronan slowly turned his head toward Jedediah. His eyes were gray like winter stone. "I wasn't talking to you." He looked back at Alara. "I said get up." Alara rose slowly, clutching the rag to her chest. Through the small eye holes, she saw only a tall shadow blocking the sun. Ronan flipped a silver dollar toward her. It landed in the dirt at her feet. "Water my horse." A murmur rippled through the crowd. A silver dollar was more money than Alara had seen in years. She can't touch that horse." Barnaby Barney Stone, the saloon owner, barked from the doorway. "She's cursed." Ronan swung down from the saddle, landing softly for a man his size. "If she can scrub your floors, she can hold a rein," he said, his hand resting lightly on the bone handle of the large Bowie knife at his hip. "And if another man speaks to her while she works, he'll wish he hadn't." No one answered. Alara bent and picked up the coin. It felt heavy and real in her palm. She led Goliath to the trough. The animal did not shy away from her. It lowered its head and drank calmly. From the window of the Rattlesnake Gulch Mercantile and bank across the street, Sterling Thorne watched, his sharp eyes narrowed. He did not like losing control. That night, the Howling Coyote was loud with music and the haze of tobacco smoke. Ronan sat alone in a corner, his back to the wall, a glass of whiskey untouched before him. Every few minutes, Alara entered through the back door, carrying crates of supplies or coal. Barney shouted at her. Once, he shoved her hard enough that she stumbled. Ronan watched. When Alara dropped a heavy keg and fell to her knees, Barney raised his hand to strike her. He never finished the motion. Ronan caught his wrist midair. "Let her be," Ronan said quietly. "This is town business," Barney snapped. "She's paying a debt." "Debt?" Ronan asked. Sterling Thorne stepped forward from the shadows. He wore a fine suit and a silver-plated pocket watch with an elaborate chain. "She owes $5,000 for burning down the orphanage," Sterling said smoothly. "She works until it's paid." Ronan looked at Alara. He saw bruises on her arms. He saw the raw skin around her neck where the twine bit. 5,000, Ronan repeated. "That's right," Sterling said with a smile. Ronan reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch. He emptied its contents onto a table. Gold dust and nuggets spilled out in a bright pile. Gasps filled the room. 6,000, Ronan said. "Wait." Sterling's smile faded. "I'm buying her debt," Ronan continued. "She leaves with me." "You can't," Barney protested. "She's a monster." Ronan walked to Alara and knelt before her. He did not touch the canvas hood. He took her hand instead. "Stand up," he said softly. She did. "She comes with me at first light," Ronan told the room. "Anyone tries to stop us will regret it." Outside, under the cool night sky, Alara finally spoke to him. "Why?" she whispered. "I don't like traps," Ronan answered. "And I don't leave living things in them." They left Rattlesnake Gulch before sunrise. The journey into the Mogollon Rim lasted 3 days, the land rising slowly from dry valleys to pine-covered hills. The air grew colder and cleaner. Alara kept the coarse canvas hood on at all times. Even when they stopped by mountain streams, she turned her back before lifting the cloth just enough to drink. Ronan did not try to see her face. On the second night, they sat by a small fire. "Why did you really pay for me?" she asked. Ronan stared into the flames. "Did you start the fire?" he asked. "No," she said. "I woke to smoke." Sterling was outside watching. After he showed me a mirror, my face was ruined, melted. He said the town would never survive seeing it. "When was the last time you looked in a mirror?" Ronan asked. 3 years ago." He nodded slowly. The next afternoon, they reached his cabin. It stood on a ledge high above the valley, the distant peaks already touched with snow. For the first time in years, Alara felt a profound, quiet settle around her. Days passed. She cooked and cleaned. Ronan hunted and chopped wood. He brought her wild mountain flowers and left them on the table without comment. One night, as snow fell outside, Ronan looked at her across the fire. "It's hot in here," he said gently. "You can take it off." "I can't," she whispered. "You'll hate me." "I've seen worse than any face," he replied. "Nothing under that hood will scare me." Her hands trembled as they moved to the twine at her neck. She loosened the knot. The twine fell away. She lifted the coarse canvas slightly, exposing her chin to the firelight. Then the cabin door exploded inward. A rifle shot cracked through the air. Ronan fell backward, blood spreading across his shoulder. 3 armed men rushed inside. Alara screamed as one of them struck her to the floor. Cutter Finch stepped forward, rifle in hand. "Mr. Thorne wants his property back," he said with a cruel grin. Flames began to rise in the corner as lamp oil soaked into the floor. They dragged Alara into the snow. Inside the burning cabin, Ronan lay bleeding on the floor. And as the fire climbed the walls around him, the mountain man opened his eyes. He was not dead yet. The fire swallowed the cabin in a roar of orange and black. Sparks flew into the blizzard like angry stars. Ronan lay half buried in the snow, a few yards from the door, his shoulder burning and freezing at the same time. Every breath cut like a knife in his chest. For a moment, he let himself close his eyes. He saw Alara standing on the platform in Rattlesnake Gulch with stones flying at her feet. He saw her lifting the hood just enough to drink water. He saw her hands shaking as she loosened the twine. Then he saw Cutter Finch's grin. Ronan forced his eyes open. The storm howled around him. The men were gone. Alara was gone. He rolled onto his side and screamed as pain shot through his shoulder. The bullet had torn through muscle and bone. Blood soaked his buckskin coat and froze at the edges. "Get up," he growled to himself. He dragged his body across the snow until he reached a low rock shelf that blocked the wind. He pressed his back against it and used his teeth to rip a strip from his shirt. With shaking fingers, he packed snow against the wound to slow the bleeding, then tied the cloth tight around his shoulder. His vision blurred, but he did not faint. Ronan Blackwood had buried a brother in these mountains. He had survived avalanches and hunger and fever. He would survive this. He pushed himself to his feet. The wind had nearly erased the tracks, but he knew the path down the southern ridge. Cutter Finch would not risk another route in a storm like this. They would have taken the mule and ridden hard for Rattlesnake Gulch. Ronan began to walk. Each step felt like stepping on broken glass. His left arm hung useless. Snow stung his face, but anger kept him moving. Not loud anger, not wild anger. A cold, steady anger that burned deep. They had taken her back to the cage. They had set fire to the only home she had known without fear. They had called her property. The storm lasted 2 days. Cutter and his men rode hard, but they showed no kindness. At night, they tied Alara to a tree and left her outside their tent. The canvas hood froze stiff around her face. Her wrists bled where the rope bit into her skin. "You're lucky we don't hang you on the spot," one of the men muttered. Alara did not answer. She stopped crying sometime during the second night. The tears had frozen against the cloth and made her face ache. Her body felt numb, but her mind burned. "Ronan is dead," she told herself. "You brought him ruin." By the time they reached Rattlesnake Gulch, the sky was clear. The town bustled as usual. People stopped what they were doing when they saw the riders. "They got her," someone shouted. Cutter Finch tipped his hat like a hero returning for battle. They cut Alara down from a mule and pushed her toward the center of town. She stumbled, her legs weak. Sterling Thorne waited on the porch of the marshal's office, calm as always. His suit was pressed, his shoes shone. "Welcome home, Alara," he said softly. "You killed him," she whispered. Sterling smiled. "I corrected a mistake." They did not put her in a jail cell. Instead, they locked her in the old iron cage in the center of the square, the same cage once used for drunks and wild dogs. Children gathered around. Men leaned on posts and watched. Women whispered behind gloved hands. "Take off the hood," a boy yelled. "Show us the monster," another called. Sterling raised a hand. "Not yet. Tomorrow, we hold a hearing, but the town deserves proof." For 2 days, Alara sat inside that cage. She barely ate. She barely slept. The town treated her like a show. On the second night, when the square was quiet, Sterling approached alone. Moonlight shone on the iron bars. "Why?" Alara asked through the hood. "Why ruin my life?" Sterling stood close, his shadow falling across her. "Because you were in my way," he said simply. "I never hurt you." "No," he agreed. "But your mother did." Alara froze. "Your mother owned this valley," Sterling continued. "Every acre. When she died, the land passed to you. I managed it while you were a child. I built the bank. I built this town. But when you turned 21, the control should have returned to you." "That's not true," Alara whispered. "It is," Sterling replied. "Unless you were unfit or dead." Her stomach dropped. "The fire," she breathed. "A necessary event," Sterling said. "I needed the town to fear you. I needed you to hide. A monster cannot claim land." Alara gripped the bars. "My face," she said. "Is it ruined?" Sterling's eyes gleamed. "Does it matter? You believe it. They believe it." He stepped back. "Tomorrow I declare you insane. You go to an asylum. You vanish and Rattlesnake Gulch remains mine." He walked away. Alara sank to her knees inside the cage. For 3 years, she had lived in shame. 3 years, she had believed she was broken. Now she did not know what was real. She did not see the figure moving across the rooftops. Ronan reached Rattlesnake Gulch after midnight. He was pale and shaking. His shoulder throbbed with infection, but he had taken a revolver from a drunk passed out behind Blackwood livery. 5 bullets remained in the chamber. He saw the cage. He saw Alara curled inside. Something inside him went still. He needed chaos. O'Malley's general store stood near the bank. Barrels of kerosene lined the back wall. Ronan slipped inside, smashed a lantern against the wood, and stepped away as flames climbed fast. Sunday morning arrived with smoke already hanging in the air. The church bells rang. A platform had been built beside the cage. The whole town gathered. Men stood shoulder to shoulder. Women clutched their children. Sterling Thorne stepped onto the platform, holding a Bible. "Citizens of Rattlesnake Gulch," he called. "We gather to deal with a danger among us." Deputies dragged Alara from the cage. She stumbled up the steps. "Remove the covering," Sterling ordered. Cutter Finch grabbed her arms. The marshal reached for the twine. An explosion shook the square. O'Malley's general store burst into flame. Glass shattered outward. Horses screamed and broke loose. People turned in panic. A single shot rang out. Cutter jumped back as a bullet struck the wood near his boots. Ronan stood in the street, smoke behind him, revolver raised. He looked like a man returned from the grave. His coat was burned at the edges. His face was pale with fever. His left arm was bound tight to his chest. "Blackwood," Cutter hissed. Ronan fired again. The marshal's hat flew off his head. The crowd scattered. Ronan moved toward the platform, step by step. Cutter drew his weapon. Ronan spun and fired twice more. 1 bullet struck Cutter in the shoulder. He fell with a curse. The revolver clicked empty. Ronan tossed it aside and drew his Bowie knife. He climbed the platform. Sterling backed away, his face white. "You should be dead," Sterling stammered. "I don't die easy," Ronan replied. He turned to Alara. "Trust me," he said softly. The fire crackled in the distance. The crowd stood frozen. Ronan reached for the twine at her neck. She shook her head. "Don't. He lied to you," Ronan said. With steady hands, he untied the knot. The coarse canvas hood fell into his hand. The town held its breath. The hood slipped from Alara's head and landed softly on the wooden boards of the platform. For a long moment, no one spoke. The fire from O'Malley's crackled in the distance. Smoke drifted across the square. Horses stamped and snorted. But on that platform, the world felt still. Alara kept her eyes closed. She waited for gasps of horror. She waited for someone to shout, "Monster!" She waited for Ronan to step back. Nothing came. "Open your eyes," Ronan said gently. His voice was not afraid. It was not shaken. It was warm. Slowly, Alara opened her eyes. She saw Ronan first. He was pale from blood loss, sweat beading on his brow, but he was smiling. Not a forced smile, not a cruel one, a soft one. "Look," he whispered. He pulled a small metal mirror from his pocket. It was scratched and simple, the kind a man used to shave. He held it up in front of her face. Alara looked. She saw smooth, pale skin. She saw high cheekbones. She saw a small, straight nose. She saw blue eyes wide with shock. There were no scars, no melted flesh, no twisted skin. She touched her cheek with trembling fingers. Warm skin met her touch. "I'm not," she whispered. "I'm not ruined." "No," Ronan said. "You never were." A wave moved through the crowd. Women covered their mouths. Men stared at the ground. The children stopped whispering. They had mocked a beautiful young woman for 3 years because they had been told to. Ronan turned toward the townsfolk. "Look at her," he called out. "Look at what you did." No one answered. Ronan stepped toward Sterling Thorne. The banker was backing away, panic rising in his eyes. "She owns this valley," Ronan said loudly. "The land, the water, the bank you stand in." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Sterling shook his head. "Lies. He's delirious." "You set the fire," Alara said, her voice stronger now. "You told him I was burned. You made me hide." Sterling's face tightened. "You have no proof." The proof is in the deed, Ronan replied, and in your fear. The marshal looked from Sterling to the crowd. The fire burned higher behind them. People were whispering now, anger mixing with shame. Sterling made a sudden move toward the edge of the platform, but Ronan caught him by the collar with his good hand. Run, Ronan said quietly. See how far you get. Sterling struggled, but he was no match for a man who had fought bears and survived storms. The marshal stepped forward slowly. Sterling Thorne, he said, his voice unsteady. You are under arrest for fraud and arson. The iron cuffs snapped shut around Sterling's wrists. The crowd parted as he was led away. Alara stood in the center of the platform with the wind moving through her hair for the first time in 3 years. She took a deep breath. It felt like freedom. Then Ronan swayed. The anger that had held him upright drained away. His knees buckled. Alara caught him before he hit the ground. I've got you, she whispered. He tried to smile. You see now, he murmured. You were never the monster. The town doctor pushed through the crowd with his bag. Move aside, he barked. He's losing blood. They carried Ronan to the hotel. Alara walked beside him, holding his hand the whole way. For 4 days, Ronan drifted in and out of fever. The bullet wound had grown infected from the storm and the fire. His skin burned hot, then turned cold. Alara never left his side. She wiped his forehead. She held a cup of water to his lips. She whispered to him when the nightmares came. Outside the hotel room, baskets of food and flowers began to pile up. Letters of apology were slipped under the door. Alara did not read them. On the 5th morning, Ronan opened his eyes, clear and steady. You're still here, he said softly. Where else would I be? She answered. He tried to sit up, wincing as his shoulder protested. You own half this town, he said. You could be anywhere. Alara looked out the window at Rattlesnake Gulch. People walked carefully now. They avoided looking up at her window. They don't love me, she said quietly. They fear losing what I own. Ronan nodded. Now that's how towns like this work. She turned back to him. I don't want it, she said. You don't want what? The bank, the buildings, the power. Ronan studied her face. In the sunlight, she looked even more striking than before. But there was strength there, too. What do you want? He asked. She smiled faintly. I want the wind, she said, and the quiet. The legal papers were brought from Helena within the week. Lawyers in fine coats filled the bank office. Deeds were signed. Titles were transferred. Alara Vance became the legal owner of the Northern Valley. Her first order was simple. Rebuild St. Jude's home for children, she said. Brick walls this time, with books and gardens. The lawyer nodded eagerly. And sell the rest, she continued. The man blinked. Sell the Howlin' Coyote, the extra land, the rental houses, and put the money into a trust for the children and for widows. The lawyer stared in disbelief. You're giving away a fortune. I never wanted a fortune, she replied. That evening, she returned to the hotel room to find Ronan packing his saddlebag. You're leaving, she said. He did not look at her. My work is done, he said. You have your life back. And you? She asked. I belong in the mountains. He lifted his pack with one hand and walked toward the door. Ronan, she said sharply. He stopped. You told me you don't leave things in traps. I'm a trap right now. This town is just another cage. A nicer one, but still a cage. He watched her carefully. I don't want silk dresses, she said. I don't want bank meetings. I want mornings that smell like pine. Ronan stepped closer. It's a hard life, he warned. Cold winters, no comfort. I had no comfort in a cage, she replied. At least in the mountains, I can breathe. He dropped his pack. You sure? He asked. She stepped forward and placed her hand against his chest. I want to be where someone sees me, she said. Not as a monster, not as a landowner, just as me. Ronan lowered his forehead to hers. They left Rattlesnake Gulch before dawn. No speeches, no advice. The deed for the new orphanage rested on the hotel desk. The town woke to find them gone. Sterling Thorne was convicted within months. Witnesses came forward. Accounts were uncovered. The fire at St. Jude's home was proven to be set with oil from his own storehouse. He died in prison 2 years later, bitter and forgotten. Rattlesnake Gulch did not last long after that. The railroad bypassed it, and businesses closed. The Howlin' Coyote roof collapsed one winter. The mercantile and bank windows shattered and were never repaired. The iron cage in the square rusted until it fell apart. But stories traveled faster than trains. Hunters and trappers spoke of a strong cabin high in the Mogollon Rim. They said smoke curled from its chimney even in the coldest months. They said a man with a limp guarded the trails with sharp eyes and steady aim. And they spoke of the woman beside him. They said she rode with her hair loose in the wind. They said she laughed freely. They said her face was the kind that made men pause and women smile. They did not call her monster. They called her brave. Alara Vance never wore a coarse canvas hood again. When she looked into a mirror now, she did not search for flaws. She saw the girl who survived shame. Yet she saw the woman who walked away from power to find peace. And when the wind moved through the mountains at night, it carried no judgment, only freedom. High above the valley, where the air was clean and the world felt honest, the beauty behind the canvas found her.